As the welcome censer chimed, a group of men and women walked in, each wearing a hostile expression on their faces. Caroline sensed trouble but took a couple of bold steps forward, smiling, and asked, "Are you here to buy clothes? Please feel free to look around." The leading woman sneered, "Buy your mother's ex," and promptly delivered a resounding slap to Caroline's face. Stunned, Caroline, with stars in her eyes, covered her face and cried out, "Who are you? Why are you hitting me? Did you mistake me for someone else?" The woman sneered again, "Are you Caroline?" Caroline, still dazed, nodded. Without hesitation, the woman slapped her again, catching Caroline off guard, saying, "I'm slapping you, you fox spirit. How dare you seduce my man?" After a brief numbness, Caroline's face began to heat up, tinged with pain. She blinked hard, squeezing out tears, and the anger of humiliation was gradually replaced by guilt because she now knew who this woman was. The woman casually shook her wrist, appearing in a good mood, and turned to the people behind her, saying, "Help me smash the store. Consider it my treat for everyone to relieve stress. Don't worry, I'll take care of any consequences." The store displayed newly stocked winter fashion worth a considerable amount of money. Panicking, Caroline rushed over, attempting to stop them. "Don't smash it. Don't smash it. I'll call the police." The woman raised her phone to record, "Smash it. Don't be afraid. You better hurry and call the police. I want this to blow up." Caroline cried, anxiously following the vandals. They tore down items, she picked up others, like a stray dog surrounded for a bone, spun around by a group playing a cruel prank. The destruction continued for over half an hour. Caroline, exhausted, sat helplessly in a corner, crying as she watched the ruined merchandise. Luxurious mink coats, high-fill power goose-down jackets, delicate cashmere overcoats, all turned into damaged goods. The woman, finally relieved and satisfied, leisurely put away her phone, drawled, "All right, folks, that's it." Just as the words fell, there was a sound. Someone used scissors to cut open a goose-down jacket, and the feathers instantly burst out, adding a touch of desolation to the chaotic scene. The woman walked up to Caroline, patting her face and saying, "You better hurry and call the police, or we'll be on our way." Caroline closed her eyes, remaining silent. The woman chuckled, "Do you realize you're in the wrong? Did you ever think that the day would come when you seduced my man? Let me tell you, if the police ever come looking for me, I'll spread the video all over the internet. I'll make sure you can't stay here. I'll let all those wealthy ladies who buy clothes in your store know what kind of person you are. Send it back to your hometown, let your parents and fellow villagers see what you've been up to outside." Caroline choked up, I won't call the police. Just go." The woman stood up, waved her hand, and shouted, "Let's go, folks. I'll treat you to barbecue." Once Caroline confirmed that they were far away, she jumped up, closed the door, and tearfully called Mason. After more than half an hour, Mason arrived, shocked by the scene. He walked over, helping Caroline remove the feathers from her hair, and asked, "What happened?" Caroline pouted, leaning on Mason's shoulder, crying loudly, "She came in and slapped me, told people to smash the store. She brought so many people, I was afraid to provoke her, couldn't call the police or resist, could only shrink back for self-preservation. Mason, she's your wife, you have to stand up for me. You said you and her were divorcing soon, that there was no more affection between you two, that's why I'm with you. I've been obedient enough. Why does she still treat me like this?" Mason looked complicated, struggling to find words. Caroline continued crying, seeing Mason's silence, she clenched her fists and pounded his chest, "I can't swallow this. You have to give me an explanation today. She ruined so many of my clothes, the amount is enough for her to be sentenced. If you don't care, I'll go all out. I'd rather ruin my reputation, I'll make sure she goes to jail." Mason sighed, bent down, and pulled out a tissue from the pile of torn fabric. He handed Caroline 2 tissues to wipe her tears, saying, "Caroline, let it go. This matter shouldn't be escalated. Even if you don't care, shouldn't you consider me? She's just crazy. As long as you're okay, it's fine. It's just a loss of a few pieces of clothing. Calculate your losses, and I'll transfer you the money shortly. We'll fill this gap and bring in a better batch of goods." Caroline cried even harder, but ultimately didn't say anything more. At night, Mason stayed at Caroline's place. After a passionate encounter, Mason, exhausted, fell into a deep sleep with snores resembling a pig, while Caroline, wide-eyed, confronted the darkness. The 2 slaps she received during the day felt like enduring 2 warmers, radiating persistent warmth, making it impossible for her to forget the humiliating sensation. Although Mason had transferred her money and promised to accompany her on a trip in a while, she couldn't swallow this anger. Why should she endure a beating? Even if she was the third party, it was because of Mason's promise of a quick divorce that she got involved with him. In a way, she was still the victim. If that crazy woman had real abilities, she should go after Mason instead of going crazy here. In the end, wasn't she just picking on an easy target? Thinking about this, Caroline glared resentfully at Mason beside her, clenching her jaws until they felt stiff. No, this matter cannot be let go. She was the one who got beaten. How could a man who was detached from the situation empathize? Since Mason wouldn't help her, she would have to find a way to get revenge herself. Caroline knew nothing about Mason's wife, not even her name. Mason rarely mentioned this mysterious woman in front of her. She had once pestered Mason for details but only got snippets like, no feelings for a long time and we'll divorce in the future. If she asked more, Mason would get angry. Not wanting to make trouble for herself, and considering Mason's wealth was good for her, she was afraid to ask further. To seek revenge, she needed at least to pinpoint the enemy's location. But whom could she ask? Caroline glanced at Mason once again, catching sight of his phone on the bedside table. After all, that woman was Mason's wife. Even if their relationship was strained, they would usually have some contact, right? Caroline thought, perhaps she could find some useful information in Mason's phone. Caroline quietly got out of bed, picked up the phone, used Mason's finger to unlock it, and then slipped into the bathroom. She scrolled through the WeChat contacts, finding nothing useful. She then checked the recent chat records, swiping twice, and a message from Sydney Barbecue caught her attention. It was just because of the last message in the list. I want to settle the score with that fox spirit. Trembling hands, Caroline clicked into the friend circle of Sydney Barbecue, going through posts, piece by piece, piecing together information about her. The owner of Sydney Barbecue was named Sydney. She rarely used filters in photos, loved buying handbags, and seemed to have a bold personality. Her friend circle captions often featured phrases like Sydney, how this and that, resembling a big sister in the realm. Caroline steadied her mind, placed Mason's phone back, and used her own phone to search for the location of Sydney Barbecue. The shop was on Huaihai Middle Road, not far from her. Now that she had found the lair of the troublemaker, she had a plan in mind. Today's humiliation would be repaid tenfold in the future. Caroline chose not to vandalize the store. Firstly, she knew she couldn't match Sydney's craziness, and secondly, Sydney was likely to call the police, and she didn't want to get into unnecessary trouble. She assessed her slender arms and legs in the mirror, realizing that a more subtle approach suited her better. The next day, Caroline booked a room in a nearby hotel and ordered takeout from Sydney Barbecue using that address. After receiving the meal, she buried some of her hair in the dishes, took a photo, gave a negative review, and turned off her phone. On the third day, she reported Sydney Barbecue to the local health department for substandard food hygiene. On the fourth day, she reported to the local administrative department about Sydney Barbecue occupying public space and simultaneously filed a police complaint about nighttime barbecue disturbances. On the fifth day, she reported Sydney Barbecue to the local fire department for not meeting fire safety standards. Most restaurants couldn't withstand such strict scrutiny from these relevant departments, especially a roadside barbecue shop operating both indoors and outdoors. Additionally, Caroline frequently posted photos and negative reviews of problematic deliveries on platforms and gave low ratings on food review websites. As she wished, a few days later, Sydney Barbecue really closed down for adjustment. Caroline felt both happy and relieved. That impulsive woman who thought she could compete with her? Caroline thought, Sydney, if you dare reopen your shop, I'll keep going after you. I'll ruin you. Feeling triumphant, Caroline indulged in beauty treatments, got her hair done, and went on a shopping spree. When the lightheaded feeling dissipated, she suddenly realized a problem. Mason hadn't visited or contacted her for a long time, a situation that had never occurred before. Caroline tried leaving messages and calling Mason, but there was no response. She felt a strange sense of panic, unsure of what went wrong. During the time she focused on Sydney, had Mason found out and gotten angry? It shouldn't be the case. Mason had explicitly stated that he and his wife had long lost their emotional connection. The only reason they hadn't divorced yet was for their child about to enter school and the elderly person with heart problems. Caroline and Mason had always been affectionate, and she had even suffered grievances before. Mason wouldn't just ignore her because she caused a little trouble. Caroline scratched her head, unable to think of a reasonable explanation for Mason's disappearance. The more she thought about it, the more uneasy she felt. Determined to find out what was going on, she decided to go to Mason's company to look for him. Caroline and Mason had been together for over a year, and this was the first time Caroline had come to Mason's company. As she reached the entrance, a sense of fear crept in. Mason had repeatedly warned her not to come to the company, as it would create a bad impression. He made it clear that if she dared to visit, they would break up. Caroline hesitated for a while, but thinking about Mason's sudden disappearance, she decided to pose as an old classmate and inquire. At the ground floor security post, Caroline was stopped by the guard. After registering as a visitor, the security escorted her to a nearby meeting room to wait. After about 15 minutes, footsteps approached, and the door was pushed open. The security let in a tall and slim woman with a commanding presence. "She's here to see Mason," claiming to be Mason's old classmate, the security guard whispered and then respectfully exited. Caroline looked at the woman across from her, slowly standing up. The woman gestured for her to sit down, expressionless, and asked, "Which period were you Mason's classmate?" Caroline didn't answer immediately and instead asked, "Where is Mason? I've been trying to reach him. It seems like he's gone off the grid." The woman chuckled lightly, staring at Caroline. "Who are you?" Caroline asked, "Who are you talking about?" The woman said, "Are you the one selling clothes, or are you the one selling barbecue?" Caroline's heart raced inexplicably. Something was about to be revealed. "Who are you?" she demanded. The woman smiled calmly. "Let me introduce myself. I am Mason's wife and the person in charge of this company, Emery." Caroline's mind roared, "You're Mason's wife? Then, that's Sydney." Emery lifted her wrist to check her watch. "Long story short, I didn't want to bother with you too, but Mason has no sense of proportion, spending too much money on you. All of that is our joint property. Oh, by the way, I arranged for someone to hint to Sydney. Mason is secretly keeping you while waiting for us to divorce. She heard you assumed the position of Mason's wife, and she couldn't help but get angry." Caroline stared at Emery in shock. Emery raised her wrist again. "Sorry, I have another meeting. I'll leave now." Caroline's vision blurred, a lump of bitterness stuck in her throat. "Wait, where's Mason?" Emery said, "I don't know, probably went out to play with that barbecue seller, or maybe found some new person. Anything is possible." Caroline, with a weak voice, asked, "Then, why haven't you two divorced?" Emery smiled. "If he had a smaller appetite and didn't covet what he shouldn't take, I'd be willing to sign any time. But he wants to disgust me with his affairs, force me to sign, that's impossible." Emery pushed the door and left, the rhythmic sound of high heels on the floor gradually fading away. Caroline slumped into the cold chair, recalling the whole story of being deceived by Mason, feeling tears welling up without a way to cry. So, after all this turmoil, she ended up being the other woman for Mason? And to top it off, she was beaten up by the pretentious original wife, pretending to be the third party? What kind of messed up situation was this? Caroline stood up abruptly, stormed out, and walked furiously for 2 blocks until her anger subsided. She realized that she had been too lenient with Sydney before. Just shutting down her shop was nothing. Maybe, in a few days, Sydney would reopen it, and Caroline would be left with losses. It was laughable how Caroline, considering herself clever, ended up not harming the shrewd woman at all. No, she couldn't swallow this indignation. Now, thinking back, any trickery was not as satisfying as retaliating in kind. Sydney hit her, and she should hit back. Subsequently, Caroline lurked near Sydney's barbecue shop every day. After about 2 weeks, the barbecue shop finally reopened. Sydney, radiant and charming, welcomed guests in the shop as if nothing had happened. It infuriated Caroline to the core. When the barbecue shop was crowded in the evening, Caroline endured to the limit and decided to go all out. She first called the police and emergency services, then, holding her phone and wielding a baseball bat, she rushed into the shop, smashing tables and chairs while loudly shouting, "Sydney, you homewrecker. You shameless fox. Come and see, everyone, this woman is seducing my husband." These impactful words quickly gathered a crowd of onlookers, exactly what Caroline wanted. No matter the truth or illusion, as long as she started the chaos, seized the high ground of public opinion, at least half of the people would believe her. And if half believed, Sydney would never clear her name, even if she jumped into the Yellow River. Of course, Sydney wasn't someone to be trifled with. Her reaction was quick. Facing Caroline's attack, she counterattacked, "You're the mistress. You're the one seducing my man, you shameless fox. How dare you turn the tables?" Caroline laughed loudly. "Are you Mason's wife? Do you have any shame?" Mason's wife is Emery. Who are you? Are you even worthy? Sydney, exposed publicly, infuriated and embarrassed, grabbed a plastic chair and prepared to strike. The nearby waitstaff desperately tried to stop her, saying, "Sis Sydney, don't be impulsive. If you hurt her, you'll trouble yourself." Caroline continued to provoke, "Hit me. You've hit me before. Go ahead, you shameless slut." Ignoring the staff, Sydney fiercely swung the plastic chair at Caroline. With a miserable scream, Caroline quickly fell to the ground. At that moment, the police arrived, followed by an ambulance. The paramedics lifted the moaning Caroline onto the ambulance, while the police took Sydney away. Spectators dispersed, leaving behind a chaotic scene. On the other end of the internet, Emery watched the video uploaded by the netizens, tossed the phone in front of Mason, and said, "Two women fighting for you. Do you think you're quite charming?" Mason remained silent. Emery sneered, "It's okay. I don't care. Keep going. Play with fire, get burned. In a few days, my lawyer will pursue their joint property. If you're willing to sign now, you can still get a share of a worry-free life for the rest of your days. If you insist on taking this company, then let it be." Mason scratched his head in irritation and left, slamming the door. Now, he regretted playing too big of a game. Of course, he admitted his indulgence and the element of opportunism. He had been submissive to Emery, a strong woman, for years. Suddenly being elevated by two women felt wonderful, but in the current situation, the most advantageous move was to quickly disentangle himself from those two foolish women and plan his next steps. Mason didn't want to wait a moment longer. He promptly sent breakup messages to both women, blocking them on all platforms decisively, treating it like disposing of garbage. To avoid the storm, Mason flew out of town on the same day, and he stayed away for over a month. When he returned, he had a change of heart. He decided to sign the divorce papers. He realized he was originally just a husband, nearly a burdensome one at that. He couldn't earn the money Emery was willing to give him. What was the point of fighting for the company? Living the rest of his life with money, enjoying leisure, and chasing women wasn't a bad idea. Why be so greedy? Mason eventually reached an agreement with Emery. After submitting the divorce application, he felt like he had been given a new lease on life. Now, thinking back to those two vulgar women from the past, he found it hard to digest. He decided to present a more refined version of himself and find a woman with a higher class. Mason joined a fitness class, indulging in a daily routine of eating, drinking, having fun, and exercising. One day, he successfully struck up a conversation with a beautiful lady who had returned from abroad, and she accepted his invitation for a date. That afternoon, he styled himself meticulously, looking slick and shiny. He drove to the meeting place, contemplating what to say and how to advance further. Unfortunately, he failed to notice a car that had been following him all along. Arriving at the destination, he leisurely got out of the car, adjusted his coat, and was about to enter the restaurant when suddenly someone rushed from the side. He felt something was amiss, hastily dodged, and in that evasion, the crowbar that should have hit his leg struck his waist severely. Mason screamed in agony, falling to the ground. Facing the sunlight, he looked at the distorted face of the woman, taking a long time to remember her name, Caroline. Caroline shouted, "You deceived me, made me a laughingstock, brought lawyers to close my shop, and demanded compensation. You've gone too far. Since you won't let me live in peace, I won't let you either." Mason opened his mouth but fainted directly. When he woke up, he was in the hospital, and Sydney was sitting by his bed. Before he could say anything, Sydney smiled and said, "Look, in the end, it's me who came to see you. Aren't I considerate enough? Oh, by the way, Mason, your lumbar spine is damaged, you're disabled for life. I think this ending is quite suitable for you. From now on, you can live peacefully. That idiot Caroline is in jail, but I have to thank her for venting anger on my behalf. It was a good experience being with you. I came today to say goodbye. Enjoy the quiet life from now on." As soon as Mason heard that he was disabled, he completely broke down. He crazily pounded his lower limbs, but he felt no pain. He shouted and wailed, but the anger and pain were confined to the world around his hospital bed. Despair surrounded him, suffocating him, and there was no one to rescue him until he ran out of strength. In the haze, Emery's words about karmic retribution echoed in his ears. What a malicious woman, to curse him like this. He hated so much, yet now he was powerless to resist. For the rest of his life, he couldn't climb onto a new bed, nor step into a new room. He was alive, yet also dead.